Welcome and hope you're doing well. Let's go into how Mahatma Gandhi promoted multicultural values for someone who was of a higher caste than most in India, who associated himself with a lower caste and known as the Untouchables. He played a great role in encouraging the British to leave South Asia and who talked about Muslim and Hindu unity throughout his life till his sad murder by a Hindu extremist. We will reveal those 5 characteristics that made Mahatma Gandhi the man that challenged an empire and united so many with existing divisions that even persist today. He is a rare breed who saw the world from a different perspective. That was brilliantly captured by Lord Richard Attenborough's film Gandhi. Like Gandhi, it took Richard 20 years to make that film, to help change today's perception on a historical figure who can be misunderstood or even worse, ignored in today's climate. Here at Mr. Multicultural, like Mahatma Gandhi, we judge a person by their character, not race, colour or religion. If we have this today as part of our cultural makeup, maybe conflict based upon stereotypes through this racism will not be supported by the mainstream media. This is why we have encouraged everyone to create a better understanding of each other's culture. So why don't you join our multicultural family if new, to support true social cohesion and end those unnecessary conflicts through ignorance. Mahatma Gandhi didn't have an easy life, as these articles will show, as he was trying to avoid war in South Asia. However, he knew the need to protest against unfair salt taxes by the British, that every human being needs to survive. He would have a better understanding on the conflict in Afghanistan due to his own appreciation of religion and Western values, as well as the curse from poverty on the young and the old. The present 20-year war in Afghanistan could have been avoided if NATO, who had then backed the Afghan Mujahideen to defeat the Soviet Union, that led to the end of the Cold War since the Second World War, that ultimately united Berlin to create this united Germany. And subsequently, Eastern Europeans, with their population, are now able to migrate throughout the world for a better life, with the Americans becoming the global superpower, with the riches that followed thereafter.
It just reminds me of actually one of my favourite quotes of all time, which is a Gandhi quote, which is when he was asked what he thought of Western civilization. He said he thought it would be a good idea.
If only they had spent a fraction of their estimated $2.26 trillion on the Afghan people who had fought their Cold War from 1979 and not left them to rot after 1989. That made Afghanistan this breeding ground for those elements who wanted to attack the West. And after the death of Osama bin Laden, there should have been peace talks in that region, with NATO withdrawing. We had honoured Mahatma Gandhi's legacy for his multicultural wisdom, with his great-grandson Tusha Gandhi flying over to receive this honour, who explained Gandhi's philosophical wisdom in this clip. It was the great late Lord Attenborough who made the film Gandhi, who presented this honour on our behalf at the Emma Show in London.
Good evening. An eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind. As we watch the world going blind in an orgy of violence and revenge, these words of Mahatma Gandhi come to mind. Humanity cannot thrive by mere tolerance because tolerance is finite. For a healthy, multi-hued society, one needs to understand and respect the practices of others, no matter how intrusive and repugnant they may seem. Mahatma Gandhi said, "I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all the lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible, but I refuse to be blown off my feet by any." If we are to survive, not merely survive, but to thrive as human beings, we need to learn the meaning of nonviolence, learn it fast, and imbibe it into our lives. The sands of time are running out on us. Today we are faced with the option nonviolence or non-existence. I accept the Emma Awards on behalf of my great-grandfather, Mohandas K. Gandhi, the Mahatma. I not only accept it as an honor for the Mahatma, but as a reconfirmation of our faith in nonviolence and as a tribute to every human being who refuses to accept injustice, who fights against prejudices and hate, and who does this all with an unwavering faith in nonviolence. As Managing Trustee of Mahatma Gandhi Foundation, I thank you.
Number 1. Positive outlook. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born on October 2nd, 1869. In Porbandar, India, to a devout Hindu family who belonged to the Banaya caste, a group of hard-working merchants from Gujarat. Indian society at the time was shaped by the British East Indian Company of the 1600s, a trade deal between King James I and Akbar the Great that traded exotic spices for English merchants. This time of economic prosperity collapsed in the 1700s. The British proceeded to exploit the population for goods, and new policies were being unlawfully introduced, allowing the British to annex more areas of India. At the age of 9, he joined a local school and was regarded as an average student. However, he spent his free time reading rather than playing with other children. At this age, he became intrigued about the religious practices of his family, especially his mother, who would often be fasting due to her spirituality. In 1876, Queen Victoria was announced the Empress of India due to the Indian Mutiny of 1857, which shaped a so-called peaceful British rule over its colony in India. Nevertheless, development within India was a slow process, with Britain exporting goods, leaving the region to experience famine. Number 2. Discipline. In 1883, aged 13, he was married to 14-year-old Kasturbai Makhanji Kapadia in an arranged marriage. However, Gandhi would experience multiple hardships during this period of his life. Just 2 years following his marriage, his father sadly passed away. Gandhi and his wife had just had their first child, who also died a few days after being born due to cot death, the name given to the unexplained death of an infant child. Despite this unfortunate event, the couple would go on to have 4 more children, which was typical for a young Indian family. The childhood ambitions of Gandhi was to study medicine, but as this was considered beneath his caste, he was persuaded to study law instead. After his graduation, he enrolled in Samaldas College to study law, following his footsteps of his brother Laxmidas, who was developing his own independent movement against the shadow of British colonial rule. In 1888, after vowing to his family to abstain from meat, alcohol, and even women, and being warned about the temptations of greed that England would present to him, he left Bombay for London to study law. Gandhi was intimidated by the streets of London and struggled with deep anxiety when trying to pursue his career in law. It was that year that he started studying the works of Henry Saul, an English writer and campaigner for social reform, who was one of the first public figures to preach the importance of vegetarianism. Influenced by his writing, he joined London Vegetarian Society, where he met philanthropist Arnold Hills, and he was encouraged to join the Theosophical Society. It was here where he began to speak against the notion of conformity. Number 3. Determination. In 1891, Gandhi returned back to India, where he found out that his mother had died earlier in January, whilst he was in London, which spiraled him into a deep depression. He returned to Rajkot, making a modest living drafting petitions for litigants. 2 years later, a Muslim merchant in Kachua, located on the northwest coast of India, contacted Gandhi and offered him a healthy salary to work as a lawyer for his cousin in charge of a shipping business at the colony of Natal, a British colony in South Africa. It was the prejudice he faced when entering South Africa that shaped his anti-establishment views, refusing to take his turban off in court and experiencing casual racism like being kicked by law enforcers. A year later, he helped found the Natal Indian Congress, aimed at providing equal rights to all regardless of race, gender or ethnicity. The Congress would travel around South Africa to preach the word of humanity and dignity, amounting to a large following amongst the working classes. Number 4. Brave. In 1899, during the Second Boer War, following imperialistic destroying the lands of the South African Republic, Gandhi volunteered with the Natal Indian Ambulance Corps as a stretcher bearer. He was given the Queen's South African Medal, alongside 1,100 other Indian volunteers. Again in 1906, at a mass protest meeting held in Johannesburg against the new government policy, Gandhi adopted his famous methodology of satyagraha, meaning a non-violent protest encouraging Indians to endure their punishment after being inspired by Russian writer Leo Tolstoy. In 1910, he founded Tolstoy Farm with friend Herman Kallenbach, a German Jewish architect in South Africa, forming a spiritual hermitage where he resided with family and followers and developed satyagraha. His commitment to promoting change through non-violent action was a key characteristic in Mahatma Gandhi's approach to building a better multicultural world. In 1915, Gandhi returned home to India and gained his status as an Indian nationalist and community organizer. He joined the Indian National Congress, where he would begin advocating peaceful protests around Bombay. In 1918, he supported the British war effort in World War I, but remained critical of colonial authorities for measures he felt were unjust. A year later, Gandhi launched an organised campaign of passive resistance in response of Parliament's passage of the Rowlatt Act, which gave colonial authorities emergency powers to suppress subversive activities. However, violence broke out, which included a massacre of some 400 Indians attending a meeting at Amritsar by British-led soldiers. By autumn of 1920, Gandhi was the dominant figure on the political stage, commanding an influence never before attained by any political leader in India. He refashioned the 35-year-old Indian National Congress into an effective political instrument of Indian nationalism. Number 5. Committed. No longer able to pledge allegiance to the British government, Gandhi became a leading figure in the Indian Home Rule movement, calling for mass boycott. He urged government officials to stop working for the Crown, students to stop attending government schools, soldiers to leave their posts, and citizens to stop paying taxes and purchasing British goods. Rather than buy British manufactured clothes, he began to use a portable spinning wheel to produce his own cloth. The spinning wheel soon became a symbol of Indian independence and self-reliance. British authorities arrested Gandhi in March 1922 and tried him for sedition. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison but was released just 2 years later. He refrained from active participation in politics for the next several years. But in 1930, he launched a new civil disobedience campaign against the colonial government tax on salt. Thousands of Indians followed Gandhi. His march resulted in the arrest of nearly 60,000 people who broke the Salt Act, including Gandhi himself. Still, the protests elevated Gandhi into a transcendent figure around the world, and he was named Time Magazine Man of the Year for 1930. In 1931, after British authorities agreed to make some concessions, Gandhi again called off his resistance movement, hoping that the agreement would be a stepping stone to Home Rule. Gandhi attended the London Round Table Conference on Indian constitutional reform in August 1931. As the sole representative of the Indian National Congress, the Congress, however, proved fruitless. Upon his return, he was arrested once again by a newly aggressive colonial government and began a series of hunger strikes to protest against the treatment of Indian untouchables. The poorer class is known as or renamed as Harijans or Children of God. The fasting caused an uproar among the followers and resulted in a swift reform by the Hindu community and the government. By 1934, Gandhi announced his retirement from politics, as well as resignation from the Congress Party, in order to concentrate his effort on working within rural communities. However, he was drawn back into politics during the first years of World War II. India was thrown by the British into the conflict with no consensus, and Gandhi retook control of the Indian National Congress Party, demanding a British withdrawal from India in return for Indian cooperation with their war efforts. In the summer of 1942, he campaigned for an immediate British withdrawal, known as the Quit India Movement. Instead, British forces imprisoned the entire Congress leadership, and Gandhi spent several further years in jail. A new chapter in Indian-British relations opened with the victory of the Labour Party in Britain in 1945. During the next 2 years, there were prolonged negotiations between leaders, which eventually led to the Mountbatten Plan in June 1947. Britain granted South Asia its independence and formed the two countries, namely India and Pakistan. Gandhi came to terms with partition due to the growing right-wing Hindu influence from the RSS and hoped that after independence, Hindus and Muslims could achieve peace in two separate nations. In summary, amid the massive refugee following partition, Gandhi urged Hindus and Muslims to live peacefully together. He began touring the righted areas and consoled the victims. In 1947, he undertook a hunger strike until riots in Calcutta ceased, and 1 year later, he was in Delhi, successfully bringing the city into a communal truce. A few days later, on January 30th, 1948, while he was on his way to the evening prayer meeting in Delhi, he was shot down by a young Hindu fanatic from the right-wing Hindu RSS party and sadly passed away at the age of 78. The next day, roughly 1 million people followed the procession as Gandhi's body was carried through the streets of the city and cremated on the banks of the holy Jumna River. Known as the Great Soul, Gandhi played a pivotal role in India's struggle for freedom from British colonial rule. For the most part, he is still universally adored and considered the father of the nation. His non-violent protests inspired many other civil rights movements, including the one led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States. Nelson Mandela had equally taken inspiration from Gandhi in his own struggle for freedom in a white-dominated society based around apartheid. Why don't you leave a comment and share your thoughts on Mahatma Gandhi's legacy? Do you regard him as a leading pioneer who shaped South Asia and represent those multicultural values? Would really appreciate a like or even a subscribe, and if possible, donate on Patreon, however little the amount, to support this channel's ongoing mission to undertake multicultural campaigns. And remember, it's what's inside that counts, a motto we've used at the Emmas. As Mahatma Gandhi has proven, people in South Asia have always had a lot in common with their collective history beyond religion. So until next time, thank you for watching and keep it multicultural as we all pray for peace in Afghanistan.